Hello, welcome to another Working with Data and APIs video. And in this video, I'm continuing the Weather Here project, and I just want to do one thing, a very important thing. I want to look at how to stop my API key from just sitting there in my code. I mean, I have something a little bit better here, which is at least the API key is in my server code. So no one could go view source just in the browser page and see API key is there. However, I would like to open source this. This is a public example I would like to post. I would like to share it. I don't want that API key just sitting there in the code. And the way that I'm going to address this is with something called an environment variable. An environment variable is a variable. You know about variables. It's just like a thing I have in my code, like const API key equals. The thing is, I don't want my variable in the code. I want it stored in the environment. I want it to be something that's set within the operating system or whatever framework or system I'm using to run software itself, and I'm just pulling it in the code. So how do I set environment variables with Node? Ultimately, there's no one way to do this. A lot of different platforms will have mechanisms for storing and retrieving environment variables. And in fact, when I look in the next video about deploying your project to a web server, we'll have to examine, well, how do I have environment variables saved on this particular web server? But a nice sort of clean way I can do it right here locally and demonstrate it is by using a Node package called dotenv. So I'm going to go over to terminal and I'm going to say npm install .env. How .env works is summed up perfectly in this one sentence. .env is a zero dependency module that loads environment variables from a .env file into process.env. Let me show you exactly what this means. I'm going to go over to the code. I'm going to just make sure I've got it here. Yes, I've got the .env package installed as a dependency. I'm going to go to my server code. In order for .env to be in action, I need one line of code, and it's right here. I want to say require .env and then call the config function. So this is going to tell this particular server to load anything that's in a file called .env into an environment variable. So now what I need to do in whatever text editor I'm using is I need to make a new file, and I'm going to call this file, guess what, .env. Then this is now a plain text file where I can put my environment variables. Typically, you might use all uppercase for an environment variable, although I don't know if that's necessarily required. But I'm going to say API key, API underscore key equals. I'm going to go back to my code. I'm going to grab the API key. I'm going to go back to .env, and I'm going to paste it in. So now I just want to do one thing now in the server. I want to log console.log process.env, and we should see that anything that's in the .env file, as long as I require .env a call config, will now be inside of process.env. So let's restart the server, and we can see, oh boy, whoa, a lot of stuff. Look, there are lots of environment variables already there. But look at this. I've added one right here at the bottom, API key. There it is, which means I can now go here into my code, and I can change this to be API key equals process.env.api underscore key. So I can pull this API key from the environment variable. It's no longer in the code whatsoever. Let's remove that console log. Let's make sure the application is still working. I'm going to run the server. I'm going to hit refresh. And looks like I'm still getting the weather information. When I go look at the check-ins, everything is still there. I check in, and I'm still getting the weather information again. But oh, you might be asking, how is this any better? Sure, there's no API key here in the code. It just says process.env.api key, but you have a file right over here that has the API key in it right there. And so this is a convention. So it is a convention for environment variables to be stored either in an .env file or through some other mechanism based on whatever server you're using, but not to be published when the code is published. So this begs the question. Am I bothering to publish this code? Is this fine? What do I do when I deploy this? So to some extent, this is really going to matter when it comes time to deploy this project to a web server somewhere. And I'm going to do that in the next video, and we'll have to revisit this environment variable question here. But let's just say I just want to publish this as an open source project on GitHub. So why not? little extra feature in this video. This feature is also about hiding your API keys and then publishing your project onto GitHub. And I'm going to do it in the most lightweight, simple way possible. Now, you might be asking yourself, what's GitHub? What's Git? Those could be completely unfamiliar things to you. And so I'm going to refer you in the video's description to some additional information about that, as well as some video tutorials that I've made of the basic introduction to Git and GitHub. So this won't be comprehensive at all. I'm going to kind of assume some knowledge, but try to be as friendly, beginner-friendly to you as possible too when walking you through the steps. So the first thing that I want to do is actually create another file. I'm actually going to create two other files. I'm going to make a file. I'm going to call it .env. I'll call it like sample. So because I actually want, when I publish this, to publish a file that tells you how to put your API key in. And so I'm just going to say your API key here. So this .env sample file is the sort of sample. It's sort of implying rename this file to .env and put your real API key in here. And I could probably in a README or somewhere I would want to provide more context and information, but this is a nice starting point. Then I need yet another file. I'm going to create another file, and I'm going to call this .gitignore. So this is really important. Git is version control software that keeps track of all of your files and various versions of them. What gitignore does, it says, hey, don't keep track of this file. This is my own personal secret stuff. I just have it here on my machine. Don't keep track of it with Git. Don't upload it anywhere. Don't ever use it anywhere. So in order to do that, so I'm going to create that file. And what's the file I want to ignore? I want to ignore .env. I actually also want to ignore some other stuff, like node modules. I don't want that node modules directory. This is all of the other people's code of all these packages. It's a huge amount of stuff. That's not something that I want to like publish and upload when I'm publishing a project. But everything else, you know, I could presumably maybe ignore the database. Like maybe I don't want to keep the database, but I don't really care about that right now. So I'm just going to leave that be. I kind of want to ignore it. Let's ignore it. This is an interesting question. I'm not so sure whether it makes sense to ignore it or not, but I'm going to ignore it. The next step that I need to do is go back to terminal. I'm going to go back to terminal. I'm going to quit the server. I am here in the directory of this project, the weather here, and I'm going to type the commands git init. That's going to initialize this folder as a Git repository. Git init. So it initialized an empty Git repository. Then I'm going to do my first commit of everything that's in the directory. A Git commit is a moment in time saying, hey, this is a particular set of changes that I want to snapshot as a moment in time with this project and save for its history. And the truth of the matter is this is my first commit, so I'm just really saying like, hey, can you add all this stuff and save it? So to do that first commit, I'm going to do this in two steps. I'm first going to say git add, which is like add all these new files. Git add, and the dot means add everything. Now I'm ready to type git commit. Now you might think this is a little bit strange. Why is it two steps? Git add and then git commit? Don't I just want to commit all the stuff? Well, this has to do with sort of how Git works as a software system. There's a staging area that files get added to, then those files can be committed and things can be moved around in all sorts of complex ways. And this is something that I cover in more depth in that other Git and GitHub video series. But for now, all I want to tell you is that I need to add all the files and then I want to commit these files. So I'm going to say -m and I'm going to put a little message here. There's more ways that you can write longer, more thoughtful messages, but I'm just going to say this is the code from weather here as of video. I think this is going to be video 5-4. And I'm going to hit enter. And then all this stuff has been added. Now look, if you look at this list, do you see node modules there? Do you see .env there? No, because those were ignored with git ignore. The next thing that I want to do is put this on GitHub. So GitHub is a website that can host your Git repositories. This is now a Git repository sitting on this laptop. So I'm going to navigate over to GitHub /codingtrain. I'm going to come up over here. I'm going to click this button to create a new repository. Then I want to go here and I want to make this, I have a GitHub organization which is called CodingTrain. So I'm going to select that and then I'm going to make a project called The Weather Here. This is based on Joey Lee's project, The Weather Here. I'm going to initialize this with a README. No! There's so many different ways to do all this stuff and I think I show you in other videos different ways. But what the steps that I'm following here, I already created the Git repository. So I don't want to make a new one. I just want to sync the two. So I'm just going to click now. I want this to be public. I'm just going to click Create Repository. And GitHub is so nice to me. It's just saying, oh, this is all I need to do here. All I need to do is add this as a remote, right? The coding train weather here, add as a remote, and then I can push, which means send it. So I can just literally copy paste this command, go back to terminal, type that in, can copy this command, go back to terminal, paste that in, and I have sent all of the code to GitHub. I hit refresh here. This is the full project here, and if I navigate in and look at index.js, we can see that the code, the API key is come from the environment variable, but the environment variable is not set. There's just an environment sample, which is showing how to add your API key. And this is where, hopefully by the time you watch this video, there won't be this add a README button. And I will add this README, and I will add all sorts of information and instructions about how to work with this and add your own API key itself. And maybe I can actually even teleport into the future and show you a little bit of what it'll look like. And I also want to consider adding maybe a licensing information, a contributing file, a code of conduct, all the kinds of things that I might put with a new open source repository. So I've shown you now how to both hide your API keys as well as publish your code in a Git repository to the GitHub website itself. So there's one last piece that I want to show you before I wrap up this series. I can't actually run the code off of GitHub, although maybe that's something that you'll be able to do in a future time. How can I put this code somewhere on a server where that node server can actually be executed, and I have a domain that's hosting this website itself that other people can access? That's what I'll show you in the next video. See you there.